Good afternoon and welcome to the Rotary Club of Edina. I'm Sam Thompson and I'm proud to be your 66th president. We've been conducting these meetings both live and on Zoom. And just so you know the count, we had pre-registered 34 live today and 26 are on Zoom. So welcome to both of you. We're in the middle of a pandemic that has a global reach. As Rotarians, we need to step up and help those that are in need. Last month, we supported the Edina COVID-19 Relief Fund, and those funds support organizations that are meeting emerging needs in vulnerable populations. An example would be Help at Your Door, which is a nonprofit that helps seniors and individuals with disabilities. And part of the funding that we provided went towards N95 masks for volunteers that deliver food and essential items. As we navigate COVID, our grants committee will be exploring ways that we can make a difference. In June, our district received $25,000 from TRF COVID grant that went towards 5 local food shelves. As we look around the world, Rotarians are stepping up. In Turkey, District 2420 is working on a $210,000 medical project related to COVID. In Sri Lanka, they're putting thermostats in airport bathrooms and posters promoting COVID around their schools. And in England, a Rotary club called Maidenhead Bridge has a team of volunteers that are running errands for those in need, such as shopping for groceries, picking up prescriptions, mailing letters, and even walking dogs. More than 65,000 people worldwide watched the Rotary Responds virtual telethon that was in May, and that raised over $500,000 for COVID disaster response efforts. More than ever, the world needs Rotary. And our club has been and will continue to play a role in assisting those adversely affected by this pandemic. In other Rotary news, Tom Gump, our district governor and member with the Morning Club, was featured in the Rotary International magazine, just coming up, just recently out. And the story talks about starting new clubs. And in the past 2 years, Gump in our district started 4 clubs. One was the Passport Club, which are people that can move around from club to club. Another is the Echo Club, the Veterans Club, and the Human Trafficking E-Club. And we plan on having our second human trafficking panel on September 17th, so we'll have more information on that. So congratulations to Tom in our district. Okay, next we have member updates. First off, Paul Peterson played at Crooners on Sunday, this last Sunday, and I asked Paul for a quote, and Paul said, "I played my first concert since March 12th with my family. It was so good to get out and get on stage in front of a live audience. I'll never take that for granted again." And then John Mazzara had an 8-day family vacation. So our members are traveling, they're going out. I asked him how he did it, and he said they flew to Vegas and then they drove to Utah. And he went with his wife Patty and his kids Mike and Elizabeth. And they went to Zion, Bryce, and other places. And they even did a little axe throwing as part of it. And I asked him what the significance of this photo was, and I quote, "I was definitely between a rock and a hard place." And finally, Teresa B. Halverson was recently recognized as a rising star by the Minnesota Super Lawyers. And they recognize the top 2.5% of up-and-coming attorneys in Minnesota. And you either have to be 40 years or younger or practicing 10 years or less. And Teresa is with Meserly and Kramer. Congratulations, Teresa.
Right.
And finally, I just have one announcement I want to make. We are having a challenge getting people to take on duties live. And so if you go to our website, we have up on top, towards the right, there's a little button you can hit to volunteer for duties. And it's really easy. You just hit that button, it lets you check in, and you can then pick what duty you want to do. So we highly recommend, if you can take a month's worth, we'll take it. If you only want to take one week, that's great, but it allows you the opportunity to pick what you want to do at our live meetings. And we are working on getting Zoom to come into the room here so we can put our Zoom friends up on the screen. So we think by next week we'll have that going so that we can have duties on Zoom also. Okay, birthdays. We have 4 birthdays that are coming up. And assisting off the podium, we have, as a greeter, Matt Bookmeyer. Front desk, club admin is Becky. The barker is Sharon Chandler, and our photographer today roaming the room, keeping his distance, is Rick Carlson. With that, I'd like to have Heather Hansen come up and provide the invocation, pledge, and the 4-way test.
Will you please bow your heads as I pray? Dear wise and loving Father, first let me say thank you on behalf of all gathered here today. Thank you for the many and abundant blessings. Thank you for life itself, for the measure of health we need to fulfill our callings, for sustenance, I knew I was going to trip up over that word, I'm sorry, and for friendship. Thank you for the ability to be involved in useful work and for the honor of bearing appropriate responsibilities. Thank you as well for the freedom to embrace you or the freedom to reject you. Thank you for loving us even so from your boundless and gracious nature. Teach us to use our freedoms to help preserve and strengthen the freedom of all, honor the rights of others, and stand for the protection, safety, health, and benefit of all. May the wonder and beauty of the heavens inspire us. Bless this food to our bodies and our bodies to thy service. In Jesus' name, amen. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance and the 4-way test. I pledge the allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And of the things we do and say and think, first, is it the truth? Is it fair and just? Will benefit? Thank you for leading that for me, guys.
Play ball.
Hi, I'm Ann Platt. Today I'm impersonating Fred Sylvester. So I was wondering if I needed to shave my head, but they said no. I have the pleasure of introducing our guest today. Doug Johnson, could you please introduce your guest?
Very special privilege for me today. This is Kendall Qualls. Kendall, some of you may know, is running for 3rd District Congress and came with us today. Kendall has a really interesting background. I hope you can check out his website. We're talking a lot about race these days, and he's lived part of this. He spent part of his life in Harlem growing up, spent part of his life living in a trailer in Oklahoma. Now he's a very successful businessman. One of the companies that he's worked for, you all know, is Medtronic. His wife wrote the most passionate and interesting letter I've ever seen about how to be a young black man in this society today. It's worth it to go to the website to read that. I don't care what your political persuasion is. It's absolutely amazing. So he's an amazing guy. After the meeting today, I think he's going to be outside a little bit for those of you that would like to meet and greet. Some people here already have signs in the yard, which is great. But I actually invited him to Rotary back in, I think, December, and with everything happening, we finally have a date right today. So today is the first day we could hook him up.
Welcome. Sam, our president has a guest. Sam?
And Michael Thornton from the Rotary Club and U.S. Bank.
Michael, welcome. Did I miss anybody? Welcome, Kendall and Michael. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kelly Burnett, and I am the local grants chair again this year. Woohoo! Our committee has the pleasure, opportunity, honor of giving out the money of our organization to the local grants who apply in our community. We vet the grants and have a thorough review process and then allocate those funds accordingly. So this is just some of the grant recipients this year. We've given away over $45,000 across the club to various organizations in need in our community. We have 4 areas of focus. So serving the disabled or disadvantaged, supporting education, safeguarding basic needs, and serving youth. So all of our grant recipients fall into one of these 4 areas of focus. If you have any interest in joining our committee for this year, we will be kicking off in September. Our committee is a little bit different than other committees within the organization. Most of our work is done over a 3-month period, so the time commitment is not throughout the whole year. So it's a great opportunity to be involved on this committee as well as other committees in the club. So if you have interest in joining, there are sheets on your table for all the committees across the club, and I know Sam is looking to collect those if you have interest, or you can email me or call me if you have questions. And also, I just want to give a plug. Our application process will open September 1st, so if you know of any organizations in need that would fit into these criteria, please encourage them to either reach out to me or they can visit the Edina Rotary website under community service. All of our grant guidelines are listed there, and we'll start accepting applications in September with the deadline of October 31st. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Thornton. I'm a board member of the Edina Rotary, and I'm also a business banker at U.S. Bank. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Sam, for inviting me. And I came here today to talk about one of the service events that we're doing tonight, which is at the Sheridan Story. They're one of the recipients of the grants this year, and I've been honored to work with the Sheridan Story over the last year. They prepare meals for underserved children, particularly those who go to school in the North Minneapolis area. I think their mission is especially important with a lot of the recent civil unrest and things that have been going on in our beautiful city. And so I'll be honored to pack up some meals tonight, and we've got a few other board members and members of the Edina Rotary Club. For those of you who don't know, the Rotary is sort of a leadership training group, if you will, sponsored by you all, by the Edina Rotary. So thank you all for investing in us. We'll make you proud. We're going to be starting more service events with the Sheridan Story, and so I look forward to hopefully coming back and sharing my experience with them. Thank you.
All right.
Hello everyone. Sam has asked me to come up because I was unable to make the community service announcement. So I just want to let you know that my wife Janet and I will be hosting an evening around the world on Saturday, October 3rd at our home in Chanhassen. It will be an evening in Tuscany. And just for those of you that have never been to our home, our dinner parties are no fun at all. But just remember, Rotary's motto is service above self. So you can do it, Michael. No. It should be a good time. My wife is a fabulous cook. We are going to have some great Italian food. We're going to drink some great wine, and weather permitting, we might even go for a boat ride. So we'll be having 8 guests. Again, that's Saturday, October 3rd. If you'd like to join us, we'd love to have you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Michael. And last report, we have 16 hosts now, countries. So we only need 4 more. So thank you so much. So we're ready for our speaker, and I'm going to introduce Don Hutchinson, who will be introducing our speaker. Don joined our Rotary Club about 7 years ago. Lisa Walker and Don co-chaired the Rotary Gala fundraiser in 2016, and this year Don is chairing the Speakers Committee and doing a great job. Beyond Rotary, Don serves on the board of the Edina Chamber of Commerce. He and his wife, Dr. Nancy Hutchinson, have been happily married for 47 years, and they have 3 adult daughters. Some of you may recall Nancy spoke to our club in August of 2018. Don is the only member of his family who did not graduate from Edina High School. He did graduate, just not from Edina. Don actually made it through college with a BA from Wake Forest University and even graduate school with an MBA from the University of St. Thomas. His classification is financial planning. Don, if you could come up.
It's my honor today to introduce my friend, Mark Melin. Dr. Melin is the medical director for M Health Fairview's Wound Healing Institute on their West Campus. He did his general residency and vascular fellowship at Mayo. Med school was at the University of Minnesota, and Mark's undergrad was at St. Olaf. Mark and his wife Cindy live in Plymouth. They have 4 children. They are proud parents. All of these children have either graduated or are currently attending Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois. Dr. Melin has repeatedly been listed as a Minneapolis-St. Paul top doctor. He's smarter than you. He has interests in lymphatics and phlebolymphedema and the microvascular glycocalyx, as you well know, and achieving accelerated outcomes with decreased medical resource utilization. And today, Dr. Melin's going to tell us why the phrase, "Houston, we have a problem," remains front and center as the U.S. engages in extended space travel. He'll reveal the long-term effects of weightlessness on space travel. Please give a hearty Rotary welcome to Dr. Mark Melin.
Yaya is right. Way too gracious, Don. So my wife went to Gustavus. If I had applied to Edina High School, I could not get in. So Don, you and I are in good fellowship. So I've got like 60 slides. I got 15 to 20 minutes to talk. This is going to go fast. So we'll keep your attention. And I just got to say, you know, there's a class of physicians called PM&R, Physical Medicine Rehabilitation. And they are well underappreciated, and they are some of the most helpful physicians you can run into. And Nancy's in the middle, and I love Nancy. Not as much as Don loves her, but I love Nancy because she does such a phenomenal job. She is always in the top positions in the Twin Cities and does a great job. My partner on the east side that runs the East Side Wound Clinic is Sandy Rosenberg. She's wonderful. And Leah Goldman now is helping run Sister Kidney Institute. So we're going to push flow a little bit. So Flow was a book that came out in the mid-1970s by a psychologist that talked about where we want to live. And when I look at the people in this room, you can live at the top in your flow channel by always pushing yourself, right? So, and if you're not pushing yourself, you're going to get bored. If you're pushing yourself beyond where you're supposed to be, you start to experience anxiety. As I look around this room, most people are going to live way in the upper corner because incredibly smart, always going to challenge themselves up until they're 90 or 100. And this is where we feel comfortable, is when we have that kind of balance of stress and wanting to learn more. So if you haven't read this book, if you don't know this concept, this is something you want to teach other people. Really important concept, because this is what I've done to myself, and this is what I'm going to do to all of you today. There will be a test on this slide at the end. Right? This is the rocket equation. I have this on one of my Boundary Waters Nalgene bottles. This is the guy, he's a Russian who developed Tchaikovsky's equation. That's a Russian spaceship that will take off, of course, from just it's quite a ways west of, or east of Moscow. But here's the equation. There's only 2 things you really need to know about this equation. Change in velocity, so change in V, equals basically m0 over mf. It means wet mass is m0, dry mass is mf. So the way to think about this is, if you want to get a lot of stuff into space, the rocket gets really, really heavy because you need more liquid mass to lift it up to achieve a dry mass that you'll have in space. This is why it's $10,000 per pound to get something to the International Space Station. So if you want to do an experiment on the space station, $10,000 a pound. So this is where also you reach the point where you can't travel far enough because you can't get enough propellant up there to take you to the next thing. This is why they're going to create what's called the gateway system up in low Earth orbit. And then from there, the idea will harvest the moon, propellants on the moon. They'll be able to fuel to then get to where we need to from there. So that's the concept of ultimately where you need to go. So all you need to remember is change in V is wet mass over dry mass, and you'll be able to astound all your friends. Here's the issue right now that we've just taken step one at accomplishing is NASA had to buy seats from Russia at the cost of about $80 to $85 million per seat to get our astronauts since 2011 when the shuttle system was retired up to, so you got to know Russian because you got to know how to run their Soyuz capsules. So a very complex, very expensive process, and we need to get it back on US soil. So here's Space Dragon. This is the capsule that's currently attached to the International Space Station, and it's filled with panels, so it's even providing electricity to the space station while it's attached. So Colonel Hurley, Curly Bennigan both went up there, and they're due to come home. They're going to depart on August 1st. They'll splash down in the Atlantic on August 2nd. So the other thing that's circuiting in our universe right now is Elon Musk first Roadster. So Falcon Heavy lifted this up at a significant cost. Now you all can see the car. Here, let me point it out. That's the car currently floating. It'll circle back by the Earth in a few thousand years. This is Elon Musk's website, and this is how he is so geared to making a difference in terms of spaceflight. So he's already got Mars 2024, 2025, and I'm the geek that follows SpaceX very closely, and I look at all this stuff. Crew Demo 2 is up there now. Crew 1 is going to go up in early September with 4 astronauts. So how many people are in space right now? Well, this is my other geek app that I have. Well, currently there's 5 people in space. And I check this like almost every day. Here's Bennigan's son raising his arms when they took off, and we've got 3 Americans up there right now and 2 cosmonauts. And they've been up there 105 days. Chris Cassidy, who is a Navy SEAL, all the way to 54 days as of today for the other 2 guys. Here's one of the recent walks. They just completed the 3rd walk, changing out all the lithium they put in new lithium batteries for the space station. And of course, we had this historic first walk with 2 females, October 18th, with Koch and Meyer. So here's the issue in space. This looks like she's going to take a drink. The problem is you can't drink. So I'm going to read a little excerpt. This book was written in 1970, right after Armstrong and Aldrin and Collins returned. And it's interesting because I think a lot of people don't understand what happened when they first landed on Tranquility Base for the Eagle. So here it is. Buzz Aldrin had a special reason for wanting a little quiet. So he had just called to Houston and said, guys, stop talking. I need a moment of silence up here on the moon. Buzz Aldrin had a very special reason for wanting a little quiet. He had something very personal to do now inside Eagle's cabinet. After Mike Collins, who was up above 60 miles above the moon's surface in Columbia, had passed overhead on the first lunar revolution after Eagle's touchdown, Aldrin had a small table in front of the abort guidance computer, and he had little wine chalice. So I'm going to pretend this is my wine chalice. This is my fruit juice. He had a little wine chalice, the one Dean Woodford had given him, his personal preference kit. He did not have a Bible with him, but he had written down some passages he liked, including one his minister used during the communion service at Webster Presbyterian Church. I am the vine and you are the branches. Without me, you can do nothing at all. Aldrin requested air-to-ground silence and celebrated one of the strangest communions in the history of the Christian religion. So that was one of the first things he did inside Eagle on Tranquility Base before they had ever walked out. That was about an hour and a half. Here's the issue. If he had wine in his chalice and he would go to take a drink, it won't come out. It won't come out because there's no gravity. You need gravity to get fluid to flow. So here's the issue then. When you're up in space, you can't drink the fluids. It has to all be put in special pouches and designed. An astronaut actually designed these porcelain cups to put your nose into to be able to drink in space. These were selling at one time for about $100 a piece. The porcelain you can't even make anymore, so they're not even for sale. So the simple things of doing in space are on Earth are incredibly complex in space. And one of those things with the fluid is in microgravity, so in what's called low Earth orbit, LEO. So they're 250 miles up, traveling at a speed of about 15,000 miles an hour. They're constantly falling off the edge. So it's simulated gravity, even though there's still some degree of gravity. If you look at Peggy's face, and then the Canadian astronaut, now I'm blanking on his name. Look at them pre-flight and look at what happens when they're in space. Their faces are all swollen. In microgravity, you gain an extra 2 liters of fluid that float up to your head and neck, and it causes a lot of this facial swelling. And this recently has turned into an issue. They actually have an ultrasound machine on the International Space Station that they have doctors that can read these studies, and what they found was that the femoral veins the leg veins get very small because as the fluid comes up here, these veins get distended, the veins in the brain get distended, and ultimately is a huge issue. So it is part of the exercise regime that they have to do for 2.5 hours, 6 days a week, part of it, because they have to maintain muscle mass, maintain bone mass, because all that disappears when you're in microgravity. So you have to exercise very hard, and those straps hold you down. Otherwise, if you tried to run, you would literally push yourself up to the ceiling. So these exercises are actually very difficult. Even doing weight resistance, if you put a 50-pound weight up there, it floats. So you have to strap down the weights to do resistive training. Here's the issue: orientation. Is this guy upside down or right side up? You don't know. And they don't know either. Their vestibular system dramatically changes because the otoliths in your middle ear, the little rocks that roll to tell you you're twisting left or right, don't work. This is why almost all astronauts get a small degree of nausea and space sickness their initial couple days up there, which then resolves as the plasticity of the brain allows resolution of that system. But literally, you could run upside down like this, there's no orientation. So ultimately, something just happened that was significant on the space station. 2 astronauts developed blood clots in their jugular veins. So a deep venous thrombosis, which has potential significant serious, and they identified them because they were doing ultrasounds. This was the first ever documented, and it made national news. It got into JAMA Ophthalmology, and it got into the New England Journal of Medicine. So interestingly we're not quite to Star Trek, right? We don't have a McCoy up there to do all the fancy things with his medical kits, but we do have a lot of interesting medical stuff up there, as well as medical kits that are present. So there's birth control up there because almost all female astronauts take birth control, which doubles your risk of blood clots. They take it because it's very inconvenient to have a period while you're in the space station. And then, so here we got, and the interesting thing about Star Trek, the Trekkies, they are dogged about their shows. They actually got the first shuttle renamed the Enterprise after Starship Enterprise, and all Leonard Nimoy and all these guys showed up when they were flying this back in the 70s on the back of a 747. So here's what was published in the New England Journal of Medicine showing the time course of this astronaut getting identified with a deep venous thrombosis in their neck. Nobody had had to deal with this before. And then up there they had injectable medication. They flew up on the next space shuttle resupply ship, oral medication to change for anticoagulation. They monitored this, and then of course they had to bring the astronaut back down. The minute they hit and landed, now this was in a cosmonaut, they don't land in the water, they land on ground. So as it gets close to ground, their engines lift off so it doesn't crash, despite the presence of the parachutes. They immediately ultrasounded that astronaut's neck, thrombus was gone. It's like, well, where'd it go? Nobody knows. So this is an issue, and this is an issue for getting to Mars. The other thing that this correlates with is, and this was published in the American Journal of Radiology earlier this year, astronauts' brains change when you do serial MRIs. Now, there is not an MRI machine on the space station, but when you look at pre-flight, post-flight, there's significant changes that are occurring. Now, it doesn't appear to have long-term damage because, again, plasticity of the brain, but you can see now MRI changes that are making a difference. And these are people that are up there for maybe 6 months with, Mark and his Scott Kelly twin brother. They did the twin studies that was published April of last year. And clearly, a year in space has a huge impact. Radiation, cosmic radiation, the microbiome up there is bacteria is totally different. We got to figure out what do we need for probiotics. How do we keep gut safety healthy up there? How do we do all this? So the twin study was incredibly helpful for that. But at the end of the day, what's happening that's really impacting about 10 to 20% of the astronauts is visual health. So they're getting something called space flight associated neuroocular syndrome. They're literally having vision changes. You cannot send somebody to Mars. It's a 9-month trip, 7-month trip just to get there. And then if you stay there for X number of 100 days and come back, how do you know this isn't going to happen? Because once you get out of low Earth orbit, these guys can be back on the ground right now within hours. You send somebody to Mars, it's days, weeks, months. So part of the issue is, how do you identify this? There are some genetic alleles where people are more at risk for this. The question is, can we start doing genetics on astronauts to screening before we even bring them into the program? It hasn't gotten to that level yet. So they're doing ultrasounds, very complex eye studies up on the space station, including OCT, optical, and I'm blanking on the name of it. It looks literally at the retina thickness, and it looks for folding. Thank you. Are you an ophthalmologist? Oh, thank you. So this is what they're trying to figure out right now. If they don't figure out this acronym SANS, Space Flight Associated Neuroocular Syndrome, you're not going to be sending anybody to live on the moon. You're not going to be sending anybody to live on Mars anytime soon. This is a huge limitation. And it somehow, we think, ties into this development of this blood clot. Sarah Zwart and Scott Smith are two of the PhDs down at NASA that are working really hard on this. And again, it's probably a multi-hit theory involving radiation, the microgravity effect, the changes in volume with the head and neck, and genetics, and then micronutrients like B12, folate, endothelial cell health. The reason all this is really important is you figured out what's going on to astronaut health up in microgravity, and if you can get them to be good up there, we can transition it to actually demographic human health here in the United States and the world. Because at the end, it all comes down to endothelial cell health. NASA right now over in Cologne is helping fund a research facility where you'll be paid $18,000 to lay head down 6 degrees for 30 straight days. Because this causes this syndrome SANS in about 30 to 60% of the volunteers, and they're increasing the CO2 levels in this facility to match what's on the space station. You and I are all breathing 0.03% CO2. On the space station, it's 0.3. It's 10 times higher. So that's probably part of the component as well, is because in this, when they did the trials over in Cologne, Germany, in the volunteers, once they increased the CO2, higher percent of people were getting this eye issue. Lymphatics. This is where Nancy is so critical, and where her colleagues are so critical, because clearly this has to have something to do with lymphatic dysfunction, and lymphatic education in the United States is way behind. It's just now starting to get caught up. But my son, who's in Wausau in medical school through the Medical College of Wisconsin, they didn't even get taught it 2 years ago about the proper education about lymphatics. It comes down to drip irrigation. So Israel figured it out many years ago that if you do drip irrigation, it's the best way to grow a plant. The body's lymphatic system functions best in drip irrigation. When it's open, flooded fields, you can't grow anything. Tissues aren't healthy when the fields are flooded. So this is what's happening up in the space station, where you're having flooding of the wrong tissues. This is where we see on the MRI. This is probably what's going on in the eye and the retina. So you got to figure out lymphatic health in addition to arterial and venous health as you're doing it. So we've always talked about the arterial venous system as the most important. Actually, what stabilizes the entire body is the lymphatic component of the blood vessels. When you don't have good lymphatic flow, this is what legs look like. You get these big ugly growths, you get thickened skin, you get big open wounds. I was with somebody this morning that had these big sores on his legs. It's like a faucet on the leg. The fluid is just dripping out onto the floor. So lymphatic dysfunction is incredibly lifestyle altering. This is where people like Nancy and the physician she works with and the certified lymphedema therapist make such an incredible difference. So doing things like manual lymphatic drainage, compression, lymphatic pumps, stretching, exercising, maintaining a healthy weight, all this is critical for lymphatic health. Ultimately, then, it comes down also to what's going on with something called the Glycocalyx, which is a 0.5 micron thick brush layer throughout your entire 60,000 miles of artery, veins, and lymphatics in your body, down to the size of 1/3 of your hair. So your hair is 17 microns. Red blood cell is 5 microns. If you add up the entire length of arteries, veins, lymphatics in your body, 60,000 miles down to the 5 micron level. And it's all lined with these endothelial cells that are like bricks on a paved wall, and every one of those endothelial cells in a healthy person has this lining called the glycocalyx. The science is just starting to get going on this whole process, and this may be a part of the issue as well. So ultimately, from a historical standpoint, and we're almost done here, Mercury and Gemini were so critical to getting to the point where you could actually get to Apollo 8, which circled the moon in 1968 in that famous reading from Genesis 1 that Lovell and Borman, and I'm blanking on the third guy's name, read. But that's what allowed then us to get to Apollo 11, right? So that's where Aldrin, Armstrong, and Collins got going. I've always said if I could be one of those 3 astronauts, who would you want to be? I want to be Collins. Now, Collins didn't step on the moon, so everybody goes, why would you pick Collins? Well, Collins remained happily married, started the Space and Air Museum in Washington, D.C., ahead of budget and under schedule, so he got it done faster, under budget, and he's just a happy guy. Armstrong passed away due to complications related to heart surgery in the mid-1990s, ended up divorced. It wasn't great, and Buzz Aldrin is Buzz Aldrin, right? I mean, he's just kind of this guy who does what he wants to do, but it's like we got to be diplomats and ambassadors at the end of the day. But these 3 guys, it's amazing that they put their lives on the line to do it. The moonrise, this was what helped started a lot of the recognition of the environmental issues, immortalized in a set of stamps. Collins watching Apollo 11 come back up with his friends. And at the end of the day, a lot of this is about taking bold, courageous steps and stepping off the ladder, not necessarily know what's going to happen. So this is where Elon Musk is starting to go. And these are the next systems in the Orion system that NASA's working on, and all the other cohorts, because ultimately we do want to have a presence on the moon. It gives us an opportunity to advance science that will ultimately result in transition and translation for what we do in this that will, I think, end up being environmentally more friendly. Because at the end of the day, it's about all our kids and grandkids that are not in this room. What world are we leaving our kids? Until we push the boundaries, get out into our flow zone and get out of where we're super comfortable, we're not gonna make the difference. So humanity's return to the moon is gonna be really important. They're anticipating 2024. And then of course, Perseverance is it's a rover that's gonna land on Mars sometime later this year. And then ultimately, will humans actually ever inhabit Mars? I don't know if it matters at the end of the day. It's probably better, cheaper to send rovers there, and why risk human lives if we don't need to? But we need to understand the science, we need to do the due diligence, and understanding just living on the International Space Station is already making a huge difference in translation for us and our health in this room now. So ultimately, it's about leaving a footprint, right? Excuse me. And we want to leave the best footprint we can, because that's what people are going to see as a favorable impression. So it's our calling to be diplomats and ambassadors, support these efforts, knowing that it's not just science in the space station, it's actually going to impact all of us in the future. Thank you. So we are sitting at, are we okay time-wise?
Great.
Questions and answers. And I'm going to make available this slide deck. Anybody that wants to have it, it's about education, so it's yours. And teach it to other people, and somebody smart's going to figure this out and help. Yes?
I have a question to this really intrigues me. I'm studying the COVID-19 pathogenic process, and there is a microcapillary, so the small vessels in the lung are involved. First the lung cells and then the vessel cells, and that's the ones you mentioned right now.
Yes.
And also people die and have thrombi.
Yes.
And it just occurred to me, just a flash. What about you create outer space conditions if these thrombi dissolve? Wouldn't that be fantastic? Put a chamber up and dissolve those microthrombi and the big thrombosis,
So, incredibly smart woman. Biostats, you said? You're a biostatistician, or you're?
I'm an allergist, but I have very analytic tendency. So I gave a talk about marijuana, and the lung looked the same as in COVID, and it got me going on COVID. I read all the articles from everything that's pathogenesis, how the virus enters, how the immunity occurs, and the pathogenic process. And I got across a microvascular theory that kills the patients with thrombi. And you had a magnificent thing here.
Yeah,
on the,
well,
solving the
look, I'm
sunlight.
standing on the shoulders of giants. I mean, none of this is original
Yeah,
work, so
but
I'm
that-
just,
that could
you know, it's,
work.
I push myself in that flow
You
zone.
could tell this to the doctor.
So it's interesting because when you look at the lungs, right, the lungs are a totally different animal than the rest of the body, and there's these cells in there called pericytes, and it is lined with endothelial cells, and there is a glycocalyx within the lungs, and we know that because I was just reading a paper 2 nights ago about how when they're doing lung transplants, they look at the fluid that comes out between removing it from the cadaver to move it into the patient, and there's components of the shed glycocalyx that are in there. So when you look at the
Excuse me, but the other endothelial cells of the rest of the endothelial system, the other vessels are also involved.
They're also involved. So there's something about the virus when it attaches to what are called the ACE2 inhibitors, right? These cellular surface markers.
And the endothelial cells have them too.
And the endothelial cells have the whole thing. And you know, the thought is if you could protect the glycocalyx, because one of the big parts of the glycocalyx is something called heparan sulfate. And heparan sulfate is actually it resists forming clots. So if you have that layer, and think of it as a shag carpet, if you have that intact on the cells, you can't get clots. So and look, I'm not a COVID expert, okay? So
As the endothelial cells break down.
yeah, and as you lose some of that protective layer, and clearly it'd be very interesting to look at are the early COVID patients shedding the glycocalyx components in urine and blood, because you can measure all this stuff with ELISA tests. And because if you can show that, then what are the things that can help protect that barrier and then to help restore it? So it's a long conversation, but I agree with you with the fascination. Don.
If these medical problems are solved that you described, what would you say is the outer limit of human space travel? What's the most we could possibly expect in the next 20, 50, 100 years?
So the question is, what are the outer limits of space travel for the next 20, 50, 100 years? And I'm going to look at you, I'm going to be really honest, and say I'm not going to hazard a guess. Because I think we have to, how do you look at value? What's the value and what are we trying to achieve by doing it? Are we trying to achieve it just to say we sent a human to Saturn? Are we doing it for purpose? You know, there's so much we can learn in low Earth orbit. There's so much we can learn by living on the moon. There's so much we can learn in getting to our closest neighbor, Mars. And beyond that, we're not moving humanity to another spaceship, right? We can't move it to another planet. We got to figure out, if anything, I hope that all this translates back into taking this technology to figure out how to live better in our environment and make it habitable for the next 100 years. I'm more worried about what's going to happen here in the next 100 years than I am about that outer boundary reach. And hopefully all this technology translates. You know, we got to get solar panels that are very cost effective that can, instead of 21% yields, can get us to 40, 50% yields. I take a 3-fold solar panel with me to the boundary waters that we use to redo our camera. I can charge a cell phone in about 3 hours on that thing so we can take pictures and photographs, etc. And micro, and how do we start to, I drive a Nissan Leaf. How do we start to get micro solar panels onto cars that can recharge as I'm driving down the road? All that technology is going to come because guys like Elon Musk and Bezos and Sir Bronson are pushing the envelope. That technology development is critical. That's what we got to support. But ultimately, I think it's more investing, that technology investing out there is like the most valuable reinvestment ourselves in our environment.
Just following up on that, how is the U.S. competing in this race right now compared to other countries? The race to develop the new technologies for space, the medical innovation, things like that, in your estimation?
Well, so the question, it's a very good question. How's the U.S. competing in that space for both the technology for space as well as the medical components for space? When you read the literature and where medical about human health in space is coming from, Germany is doing very well. They have the NV lab that's over in Cologne. They're doing great research there. China is very interested in human health, obviously. Russia has printed a lot. Turkey's printed some stuff. Japan. You know, everybody's got a little bit of skin in the game. I would tell you that we as Americans are leaders. You know, we've spent 150 man years in space, between the 500 and some people that have been up in space at some point. So, but I would tell you, I think it's going to take every country to be involved. And it's interesting, once you get up to space, what are the borders on the Earth as you look down? There are no borders. So how do we maintain connections with China, with Russia, with Japan, and continue to build this? Because we're not going to be able to do it by ourselves. The only reason Apollo 11 happened was because Russia was pushing us at the end of the day. And it ended up being a great collaboration because they used all the Apollo rockets that canceled after Apollo 17. That's where Skylab came from. That's the first Soyuz, the experiments where they actually started doing the air docks together and started getting together with the Russian. We're the leaders, but we can't do it by ourselves. And you kind of need that push, right? Competition's good. That's why I'm glad there's 3 people pushing, right? Okay, yes, please.
Yeah. You mentioned the 500 or so astronauts have been in space. Have they tracked the conditions of those astronauts? Are they under chronic treatment?
Astronauts are probably some of the most studied humans on the face of the Earth. So they're getting studied before they go up, and they're getting extensively studied why they're there, and they're getting extensively studied when they get back on the ground.
I guess what I'm asking though, are they under consistent chronic treatment as a result of their travel?
No, but they're very self-selective, right? So these are people that you put in space who are already, they're not putting people up there with diabetes, that are overweight, that have artery disease, that smoke, that don't eat well. So the selection process just to get into the astronaut corps, you're already selecting people that are at the upper echelon of humanity. Therefore, they tend to do well even when they come back. So they have a tolerance for these kind of events that they can tolerate. It was amazing when they sent John Glenn, right? So he went up in Gemini 8. He went back up again on STS-130 at a 77-year-old male. 77. And he's the oldest person that's gone up. And so the super selective process to become an astronaut means that you're fit and you basically are going to be able to tolerate anything. I think it's going to be more interesting what happens when the common man starts to do some of this stuff, right? That's where, again, this even becomes then more critical. Because I think, our bandwidth for as regular humans is going to be less tolerance for this kind of exposure.
A question from Zoom. Katie Campbell asks, what's the best way to encourage elementary age youth interest in space?
So I would say,
repeat that.
So what's the best way to encourage young kids to get into space? Can I speak as a father first? Put your cell phone away. I mean, literally, excuse me, drop your cell phone, grab a book and start reading. Excuse me, grab a instrument, play a violin, play a trumpet, play the piano, develop that skill set because music is math. And so the best mathematicians are good musicians, the best musicians are also good mathematicians. So develop these skill sets, and I think my one concern is that video games, the distraction of apps and the cell phone is such that when kids are young and their brains are so plastic, you might blunt where they ultimately could achieve. So I think back to that flow diagram, we need our kids to be way up in that upper right hand all the time. And I think cell phones and technology bring them down, and so they're constantly bored. And so they're constantly looking for that next fix, right? It's the brain on opioids. They're looking for that next fix. So get involved in math, get involved in all the STEM technologies, science, right? Teach other people. If you got to teach other people, you got to know pretty darn well yourself. You got to be a little vulnerable because you're going to get some questions that maybe you don't know. And then find ways to, find ways to work with other kids. I mean, you got to do this as, you got to be able to get along with other people. And so the social distancing aspect, I like to joke that the very first social distancing issue was Facebook, right? And now we say social distance. Well, that started how many years ago? So we got to find a way to start getting back and collaborating, actually spending time with people in a room, be comfortable with it, challenge each other, and find ways to do it collaboratively. I think we're losing some of those skill sets. Yes, sir.
Apparently, NASA spent about $2 million to develop a ballpoint pen they can use in zero gravity and upside down and things like that. And they proudly shared the information with the Russian counterpart. And Russian counterpart said, "We solved the problem a long time ago. We use pencils."
Yeah, amen.
You know? So I think we look at our old ways. It's not such a bad idea. So my question is, with all the money spent on stupid inventions, can we use part of that money to solve our current problem, like COVID-19 and things like that? I wonder there are some people who think in that direction.
I don't know if you get onto the NASA website and look at all this stuff, but they're very actively engaged. They were helping with some ventilator development. They were helping with some of those issues, because all their scientists, they're stuck at home. They're all separated. They all want to be back together, whether it's down in Florida, whether it's in Houston, whether it's in California at the Jet Propulsion Lab. I mean, they want to spend time together. It's that collaboration in the same rooms that does it. To your point about the pencil versus the pen, it does come back to value. So we can over-engineer anything, but where's the value? So I think when it comes to budgetary process, because this is unbelievably expensive, we do have to talk value. And what are we getting for that investment? What are we going to get for the return on the investment? And then where, as things start to privatize with the Musk effort, with the Sir Bronson effort, with the Bezos effort, there's got to be collaboration, because at the end of the day, we need NASA. And, NASA's already creating the pathways that are 500 to 2,000 feet above us, where we're going to be flying our planes with that look like helicopters. So it's very important. So thank you again very much. Appreciate it.
We'll keep a little distance, but thank you so much for being with us today, Dr.
Yeah, my
Melin,
privilege. My privilege.
and sharing your knowledge about outer space and how it intersects with us as humans and how it affects our world. I'm very grateful for you being here today. And on behalf of you being here, Rotary, I want to tell you, Rotary is a global network of 1.2 million neighbors, friends, and leaders and problem solvers. And we see the world and the people we unite and take action to create lasting change across the globe, in our communities, and in ourselves. And on behalf of being with us today, we are going to make a donation on your behalf to Sheraton Stories, an organization focused on food gaps with children who aren't able to receive food and reduced meal programs. Mm-hmm. The Sheraton Story provides weekend and other food gap programs serving over 10,000 children across our community. So thank you, and by behalf of that, here it is for you.
And I just want to say it's incredibly generous, because our church at Wayzata Free actually supports Sheridan Story as well. They were in our church 18 months ago, and we were just so impressed. What a fabulous organization. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was fascinating. Thank you. Looking ahead, as mentioned tonight, Rotaract, Sheridan Story. Then we have on August 5th, Vocational Networking with Bill McReevy, the speaker. And then on August 13th, Rotaract Social Event, Outside Picnic Social. I want to thank everybody that's here live and on Zoom. I want to leave you with a quote from Katherine Johnson, NASA mathematician. Like what you do, and then you will do your best. Meeting adjourned.